Chris, what seemed to be the perfect portrait of the American family. Married to Shan'ann, father of two beautiful daughters and with a son on the way, he lived in a comfortable home in Colorado and led a seemingly peaceful life. But on a Monday morning, that facade came crashing down. Shan'ann and her daughters vanished without a trace. Hours later, the tragedy would begin to unfold, and the world would watch, stunned, as a life built on lies unraveled. What drives an ordinary, seemingly loving man to murder his pregnant wife and two young daughters? How does someone hide such darkness behind a routine that appears so normal? And most disturbing, how many warning signs were ignored along the way? These questions echoed for weeks on social media, in newspaper headlines, and in the hearts of those following the case. This wasn't just a crime. It was a deep rupture in the trust placed in love and family. In this investigative documentary, you will learn every detail of the Chris Watts case, one of the most shocking crimes in recent U.S. history, reconstructed from over 2,000 pages of official records, text messages, videos, and testimonies. Everything you'll see here is based on verified sources. No speculation, just the facts and the painful timeline of a crime that shook the world. Every step, every decision, and every omission will be faithfully reconstructed. Chris and Shan'ann share their lives on social media. To followers, they were the perfect couple. Smiles, vacations, declarations of love, and a family routine full of tender moments. But behind the camera, there were debts, silent tensions, a crumbling marriage, and a new figure emerging from the shadows. Nicole Kessinger, Chris's mistress. She entered the picture just as everything began to fall apart. Throughout this video, we will follow the couple's journey from their first meeting to the night of the crime. We'll reveal how Chris's behavior gradually changed, how Shan'ann fought to save her marriage, and how, in the end, betrayal and a desire for freedom led to an irreversible decision. You'll understand how the police uncovered the truth, the mistakes Chris made, and why this crime still resonates so powerfully. Prepare to learn not just the facts, but the emotions, signs, internal conflicts, and decisions that turn an entire family into. This is the true story of Chris Watts, and it begins now. The story of Chris and Shan'ann began in 2009, when they met through mutual friends on social media. At the time, Shan'ann was emotionally vulnerable after a difficult divorce and was coping with lupus, an autoimmune disease that affected her health and self-esteem. Chris, on the other hand, was a quiet, reserved man with a calm charm. She described him as someone who appeared in her life just when she needed support, and he responded with patience, care, and presence. From the very first dates, Shan'ann was charmed by Chris's gentle nature. He not only accepted her vulnerabilities, but showed he was ready to build something stable with her. They soon began a serious relationship, and things progressed quickly. In 2012, they got married and soon decided to start a new life together in Frederick, Colorado. The calm environment of the town seemed perfect for starting a family. The couple had trouble conceiving, which led them to seek fertility treatment. In 2013, their efforts were rewarded with the birth of their first daughter, Bella. Shan'ann, who was very active on social media, shared the entire experience with great enthusiasm. Chris also seemed like a dedicated and involved father. The family smiled in videos, celebrated special occasions, and appeared to enjoy a life full of love. Both worked. Chris was a mechanic and later landed a job at Anadarko Petroleum, an oil company that offered a good salary and job security. Shan'ann sought opportunities that would allow her to work while caring for the children. After trying different roles, she found a path in network marketing. She dedicated herself to Thrive/Level, a company that sold wellness supplements and products. In 2015, the couple welcomed their second daughter, Celeste. Once again, the pregnancy required special care due to Shan'ann's health condition. Celeste was born with respiratory issues and was later diagnosed with asthma, just like Bella. The family's routine became centered around doctor visits, medications, and special care. On social media, however, everything was filtered through optimism. Shan'ann did live streams showing the girls' daily lives, the products she sold, the goals she reached, and Chris's support, always smiling in the background. It was a carefully crafted image of unity, love, and resilience. With every post, more followers became enchanted by the apparent perfection of that family. But behind the cameras, life wasn't so ideal. Financial difficulties intensified, and in 2015, the couple filed for bankruptcy. Their debts were mounting, credit cards maxed out, and medical expenses kept growing. The house, the car, daily costs, everything weighed on the couple's shoulders. Still, Shan'ann continued to show confidence and perseverance. For her, keeping the family together was the priority. Despite the problems, the Watts family seemed to endure. Chris stuck to his work routine, was present as a father, and rarely showed signs of conflict in public. Shan'ann, in turn, made up for any shortcomings with double dedication. She was the emotional engine of the home, and she was willing to go to great lengths to keep the family together. Friends and relatives described her as strong, determined, and loving. Their story began with hope, and for a long time, it seemed to work. But as the years passed, unresolved issues piled up in silence. Chris, quiet and introverted, began to grow distant, and Shan'ann, though she sensed something was wrong, still believed love would be enough to save her marriage. She had no idea the greatest danger had already entered their lives and was sleeping right beside her. Chris and Shannon's family life revolved around structured routines, shared responsibilities, and moments of affection recorded in videos and social media posts. But behind Shannon's constant smile and Chris's reserved demeanor, tensions were growing, especially financial. They both worked, but their combined income wasn't enough to cover all their expenses. The house they purchased in Frederick, along with the medical costs for their daughters, especially asthma-related treatments, became overwhelming. In 2015, the situation reached a breaking point. Chris and Shan'ann filed for bankruptcy. The couple owed over $400,000, including credit card debt, student loans, and mortgages. It was a silent turning point that shook both their confidence and emotional stability. Shannon's decision to join Thrive/Level was driven by both necessity and ambition. The direct sales model offered bonuses for performance and incentives for those with charisma. Shan'ann had both. She threw herself into her new career, using social media as her main marketing tool. Her videos about healthy living, the brand's products, and her family routine quickly gained followers. She wasn't just building a business, she was building a personal brand. With success at Thrive came all-expenses-paid trips, bonuses, and rewards. But that professional rise brought an intense work rhythm and constant exposure. Her life became an open book, carefully edited to look perfect. And while Chris appeared beside her in the videos, he seemed increasingly emotionally detached. At home, tensions rose. The couple's traditional roles had reversed. Shan'ann was now the primary provider, while Chris, though still employed, took on more domestic duties and cared for the girls when Shan'ann was away for work trips or company events. According to friends and colleagues, this made Chris uncomfortable. His self-esteem began to suffer, creating a silent rift between them. Celeste, the youngest daughter, had recurring respiratory issues. The family's routine, medication, hospital visits, daily care, became increasingly burdensome. Despite it all, Shan'ann maintained her unshakable optimism. She constantly emphasized gratitude, positivity, and faith in her videos and messages. Meanwhile, Chris began to change. Once described as sweet and approachable, he became more withdrawn. He distanced himself socially and avoided family interactions. Many noticed, but few spoke up. After all, everything still looked fine on social media. That surface stability hid deep fractures. Communication between Chris and Shan'ann broke down. Arguments became more frequent, though rarely public. Shan'ann confided in close friends, especially Nicole, about Chris's strange behavior, but she always believed it was just a phase. The pressure to maintain the image of perfection, physical exhaustion, the weight of debt, and emotional distance created the perfect storm. Chris seemed increasingly apathetic. The lack of affection and meaningful conversations slowly corroded their relationship. At this point in the story, it's crucial to understand this wasn't just a crime of passion. It was the chronicle of an emotional and financial collapse, masked by filters and hashtags. The public image the couple projected no longer reflected the truth inside their home. While Shan'ann tried to keep the family together, Chris was showing signs that something inside him was changing. And that change, still invisible to most, was about to take a terrifying, irreversible turn. It was at work that Chris met Nicole Kessinger, a geologist at Anadarko Petroleum. At first, the two barely noticed each other, but gradually, casual interactions turned into conversations, a growing closeness, and in 2018, everything changed. Nicole was different from Shan'ann, more reserved, mysterious, and with interests that aligned with Chris's, like healthy living and physical fitness. The connection between them developed silently, yet intensely. Nicole started researching Shan'ann online months before the relationship officially began. She wanted to know who she was dealing with, who was the woman still in Chris's life. This shows that even before they were officially involved, Nicole was already emotionally in, and Chris, feeling suffocated at home, dove headfirst into this new relationship. The affair began discreetly, secret dinners, hidden conversations, photos stored and disguised at. While Shan'ann was traveling or busy with work, Chris used the time to be with Nicole. They went hiking, visited restaurants, and shared moments Chris would later describe as liberating. With Nicole, he felt he had a second chance, a new life without pressure or expectation. But this involvement came with consequences. Chris began to emotionally withdraw from his family. Calls to Shan'ann became infrequent, his messages short and cold. During a family trip to San Diego, Shan'ann noticed a drastic change in her husband's behavior. He was apathetic, distracted, and indifferent to their daughters. She even told friends that something was wrong, though she didn't yet know what it was. Back in Colorado, the distance grew worse. Deeply entangled with Nicole, Chris began fantasizing about a life with her. He lied, hid conversations, deleted browser history, and used apps to erase any evidence of the affair. In messages with Nicole, he claimed to be unhappy in his marriage and suggested he planned to separate soon. Nicole, in turn, began pressuring for clarity. She said she didn't want to be the other woman and expected Chris to make a decision. At the same time, she continued researching Shan'ann and the Watts family. Her contradictory behavior revealed a relationship already heavy with tension and expectation, the kind that, over time, increases the risk of a drastic rupture. Shan'ann, even while pregnant, began to seriously suspect Chris. She noticed he was hiding his phone, avoiding conversations, and no longer affectionate. In messages to friends, Shan'ann described feeling emotionally drained, frustrated, and insecure. She suggested Chris needed therapy and thought they might be going through a rough patch. But she also admitted she'd never seen him so distant. The critical point came in July 2018. Chris and Nicole spent a weekend together while Shan'ann was away with a girl. When she returned, Shan'ann sensed something was deeply wrong. Chris wouldn't touch her, avoided eye contact, and refused to show affection. Over the next few days, his behavior only grew stranger. What started as an affair was now threatening to destroy an entire family. Chris was torn between two lives, and instead of facing the truth, he chose a darker path. He was no longer just an unfaithful husband. He was a man on the verge of committing something irreversible, and no one, not even Nicole, could predict how far he was willing to go. August 2018 marked the beginning of the complete collapse. Shan'ann was pregnant with a boy and hoped that the baby's arrival might bring the couple back together. But to Chris, the pregnancy felt more like a burden blessing. He was already living emotionally with Nicole, and the role of husband and father had become a weight he no longer wanted to carry. Shan'ann clearly noticed the shift. In messages with friends, she said Chris was cold, distant, and no longer touched her. She said he showed no excitement about the pregnancy and even refused to talk about the future. She suggested they try couples therapy, but Chris avoided the topic, either with vague answers or complete silence. Tension escalated when Shan'ann canceled the gender reveal party. She told a friend that Chris had said he didn't want the marriage anymore in her counseling. Her emotional pain was visible. Even while pregnant, exhausted, and confused, she tried to stay strong for herself and her daughters. Meanwhile, Chris was sinking deeper into the illusion of a parallel life. He sent mixed signals to Shan'ann, sometimes cold and distant, other times pretending to be present. With Nicole, he was affectionate, made plans, and seemed enthusiastic. The disconnect between what he said and what he did revealed a man torn by his own choices and consumed by lies. As a last attempt to reconnect, Shan'ann traveled with her daughters to visit family. During that time, Chris was alone in Colorado and spent every moment with Nicole. They had a romantic weekend, were seen in public, and behaved like a couple in love. Chris even hired babysitters to spend more uninterrupted time with her. But when Shan'ann returned, she found a changed man. Chris no longer hid his disinterest. He slept in a different room, avoided physical contact, and acted as if his wife's presence was a nuisance. When confronted, he simply said, "I don't feel the same anymore." There were no fights, no yelling, just the silence of someone who had already made a decision. Nicole, on the other hand, continued to push for answers. She wanted clarity, a clean break from Shan'ann, and began to question how slow Chris was. Despite being emotionally involved, she sensed something wasn't right. She started deleting browser history, messages, and even researched how police track phone data and call logs. It was as if, even without knowing exactly what would happen, she already wanted to erase her own tracks. Shan'ann's final weeks were filled with growing anxiety. She felt something dark approaching, but couldn't name it. Conversations with friends revealed her pain, her effort to save the family, and her despair at her husband's behavior. Chris, meanwhile, acted normal, at work, with neighbors, and with relatives. The tension peaked when, just days before the crime, Shan'ann wrote an emotional letter to Chris, trying to reconnect. She recalled good memories, spoke of their daughters, and expressed hope that they could rebuild everything. But Chris didn't respond. He didn't read it aloud. He showed no reaction. Chris's silence was already a sentence, and the tragedy was about to unfold. He didn't ask for help. He didn't file for divorce. He didn't seek therapy. He simply moved forward with a plan that, in his distorted mind, seemed like the only way out. And on August 13th, 2018, everything finally collapsed. In the early morning hours of August 13th, 2018, Shan'ann returned home after a business trip. A friend had dropped her off around 2 a.m. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. That same morning, around 5 a.m., Chris was left for work, or so he claimed. Hours later, Nicole Atkinson, a close friend of Shan'ann, became concerned. Shan'ann wasn't answering messages, didn't show up for appointments, and wasn't picking up her phone. Nicole, aware of the marital issues Shan'ann had shared, decided to go to the Watts home. She rang the doorbell. No answer. Shan'ann's car was still in the garage. She called Chris, who sounded far too calm. Suspicious, Nicole called the police. When officers arrived, they found a house in total silence. Nothing appeared out of place, except that Shan'ann and her daughters Bella and Celeste had vanished. Her phone, purse, and even the children's medications were still in the house. The scene was eerily clean, as if it had been staged. Chris arrived shortly after, acting cold and detached, showing no real concern. In the following days, Chris gave interviews to the media. He said he didn't know what had happened. He pleaded for Shan'ann to come back. He said he was worried, but his body language, tone of voice, and apparent lack of emotion caught the attention of police and the public. Social media began asking. Something wasn't right with this story. The investigation moved quickly. Police obtained Shan'ann's text messages, which revealed a relationship in crisis. Nicole Kessinger's search history was also analyzed. She had looked up information about Chris's wife, police investigations, and even how to delete phone data. The puzzle pieces started to come together. Chris, who at first seemed cooperative, began to contradict himself. He said he didn't know anything, then claimed Shan'ann had left with a... At another point, he suggested she might have run away. His stories changed, but his coldness remained constant. Investigators noticed this. His behavior didn't match that of a desperate husband, but rather that of someone hiding something. Nicole Atkinson played a key role. Her suspicion, her insistence with police, and her sharing of texts exchanged with Shan'ann helped accelerate the... Without her quick action, Chris might have had more time, or been able to cover his tracks more thoroughly. Security cameras from neighbors revealed something important. Chris's movements that morning didn't match his usual routine. He was seen carefully loading something into his truck, unhurried. That video would become critical evidence. Search teams were dispatched immediately. They headed to Chris's workplace, Anadarko Petroleum. It wasn't a random choice. Investigators knew Chris had access to remote, hard-to-reach areas, and it was there, among oil tanks and barren land, that the truth began to emerge. By this point, the pressure on Chris was unbearable. He was taken in for questioning, and investigators used a strategic approach: empathy, familiarity, and carefully calculated questions. Gradually, Chris began to contradict himself more and more. The mask of the perfect family man was about to fall, and the world was about to learn the truth behind that deadly silence. Chris Watts' interrogation was a turning point in the case. At first, he maintained the same demeanor he had shown in interviews: calm, polite, almost emotionless. He denied any involvement, claimed not to know where his wife and daughters were. But the experienced investigators quickly spotted the cracks in his story. Using rapport techniques, the detectives created an atmosphere of apparent empathy. They asked open-ended questions, allowed Chris to speak freely, and closely observed his reaction. With each new round of questioning, the contradictions piled up. Chris would say one thing, but surveillance footage showed another. The timeline he presented didn't hold up. His lack of emotion began to disturb even the most skeptical observers. One of the most symbolic moments came when he was asked to take a polygraph test. Chris agreed, and he failed every relevant question. Faced with the results, investigators changed their approach. They dropped the gentle tone and began pressing him with evidence. They presented inconsistencies, showed Shan'ann's messages, the videos, friends' testimonies, and urged him to tell the truth. Cornered, Chris gave a partial confession. He claimed he had caught Shan'ann killing their daughters and, in a moment of rage, strangled her. It was an attempt to justify the unjustifiable, to reverse the roles and present himself as a victim. But that version didn't hold. The children's autopsy reports contradicted his story. And once again, Chris's demeanor wasn't that of someone who had just witnessed a tragedy, but that of someone trying to shift the blame. The police knew they didn't yet have a full confession, but they had enough evidence to arrest him. And that's what they did. Chris was taken into custody, charged with first-degree murder and unlawful disposal of bodies. From that moment, the case stopped being just a mystery. It became a confirmed horror story. Suspicions turned into certainty, and the man who once smiled next to his daughters was now seen as the one responsible for their deaths. With Chris's arrest, the impact was immediate. The community was shocked, the family devastated, and the public stunned. The media covered every detail as more documents and evidence came to light. The story was no longer just about a disappearance. It was taking on increasingly sinister dimensions. The image of the model father was shattered, and the world began to understand the scale of the tragedy he had caused with his own hand. Days after his arrest, under mounting pressure, Chris Watts finally confessed. In a cold and emotionless statement, he admitted to killing Shan'ann at home, then loading her body, along with his daughters still alive, into his truck and driving them to a remote oil site owned by his company. There, he murdered Bella and Celeste before hiding the bodies. The secret plan he had carried out was now fully exposed. The cruelty of the crime shocked even the most experienced investigators. Chris had acted with chilling detachment, lied to the police, to his family, and to the public, and tried to cover his tracks. In November 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Justice was served, but the void left behind was immeasurable. The case drew worldwide attention. Thousands of people wondered how someone so seemingly normal could commit such brutality. Documentaries, news reports, and psychological analyses multiplied, but no explanation ever seemed enough. What remained was pain, shock, and the memory of 3 lives cut short. This story ends with Chris behind bars, but the impact of what he did will continue to echo for generations. If this video moved you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next investigation.